Hello there. In the quiet highlands of central Mexico, the bones of a great and silent city lie sleeping under the sun. It is a place of immense stone pyramids and a long, wide avenue that seems to point directly to the heavens. What was it like to live and dream in Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born? And so our journey begins, not with a king or a great battle, but with a design, a grand, cosmic blueprint laid out upon the earth. Before a single stone was set for a home, before the first plumes of cooking smoke rose into the dry highland air, there was a plan. Teotihuacan was not a city that grew by chance, like a wild tree sprouting from a seed dropped by the wind. No, it was conceived, envisioned as a single, monumental work of art, a mirror of the cosmos built by human hands. It's a thought that can quiet the mind, isn't it? To imagine the sheer will, the shared belief required to create something on such a scale. Imagine yourself standing on a nearby hill, looking down into the valley around 2,000 years ago. You would not see a random collection of huts and pathways. Instead, you would see the beginnings of a vast and perfect grid, stretching for miles in every direction. The entire city, which would one day cover more than 8 square miles, was oriented on this grid. It's a feature so precise, so unwavering, that it feels almost modern, yet its purpose was rooted in a deeply ancient understanding of the world. The primary axis of this grid was oriented about 15.5 degrees east of true north. This wasn't an error or a casual alignment. It was a deliberate sacred choice. Scholars have wondered for generations about this specific angle. Some believe it aligned with the rising of the Pleiades star cluster, a celestial event of great importance in many Mesoamerican cultures. Others suggest it marked the position of the setting sun on specific ritually significant days of the year, perhaps days that governed the planting and harvesting cycles. Whatever the reason, this alignment meant that the city itself was a kind of massive astronomical instrument, a clock and a calendar built of stone and earth, forever tying the lives of its inhabitants to the rhythmic dance of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The foundation of this grid was 2 great avenues that crossed at the city's heart. The most famous, the Great North-South Artery, is known to us today as the Avenue of the Dead. We will walk its length together soon enough. The other, an east-west avenue that is less prominent today, but was equally important then, divided the city into 4 immense quarters, or quadrants. This 4-part division is a recurring theme in Mesoamerican cosmology, representing the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 corners of the universe. To live in Teotihuacan was to live within this cosmic map, to have your home, your workshop, and your temple all placed within a sacred geography. It was a constant, quiet reminder that your existence was part of a much larger, divinely ordered pattern. This rigid planning extended even to the flow of water. Beneath the plastered floors of the city, engineers laid out a complex network of underground drains and canals, all conforming to the master grid. They tamed the San Juan River, which once meandered through the valley, forcing it into a straight, man-made channel that ran perfectly parallel to the east-west avenue. This was not just for flood control. It was an act of imposing cosmic order upon the natural world, a statement of humanity's power to shape the environment to match its celestial beliefs. The city's very structure was a form of communication, a silent language spoken in stone. Every street, every plaza, every building was a part of this grand, geometric sentence. The relentless repetition of the grid, the endless right angles, would have created a powerful sense of order and control. As you walked through the city, you would have been constantly guided by its unyielding structure. There were no winding, organic lanes that followed the contours of the land. Instead, there were long, straight streets, enclosed on either side by the high, windowless walls of the city's apartment compounds. The effect might have been somewhat disorienting, a maze of identical-looking corridors, but it was a maze with a divine purpose. This uniformity was a social tool, as much as an architectural one. It suggested a society with a powerful central authority, one capable of mobilizing immense labor and enforcing a singular city-wide vision for generations. It whispered of a collective identity that overshadowed the individual, a sense that everyone was a part of this vast, interconnected urban machine. And yet, within this rigid framework, as we shall see, there was incredible diversity and vibrant life. The grid was the canvas, but the people who lived within it painted a rich and complex masterpiece. It was a world of profound contrasts, of strict order and bustling life, of celestial alignment and the earthy scent of woodsmoke and damp earth. This grid was the skeleton of the metropolis, the bones upon which the flesh and spirit of the city grew. It's a testament to a people who looked to the heavens for their blueprint, and then, with incredible effort and unwavering faith, carved that blueprint into the very surface of the earth, creating a sacred city that was truly a home for the gods and for hundreds of thousands of people who lived in their powerful, ordered shadow. From the grand abstract concept of the city's grid, let's now drift down from that imaginary hillside and place our feet upon the ground. Let's find ourselves on the city's main artery, its great ceremonial heartline. We call it the Avenue of the Dead, a name given to it by the later Aztec people who found the city in ruins and believed the great mounds lining the avenue were the tombs of kings. But for the Teotihuacanos, its name is lost to time. Perhaps it was called the Sun Avenue or the Divine Road. Whatever its name, it was the central stage for the city's public life. A vast open-air temple that stretched for more than a mile and a half, a river of plaster and stone flowing through the heart of the metropolis. Imagine standing at its southern end, perhaps near the area we now call the Citadel, and looking north. The avenue unfolds before you, a breathtaking spectacle of architectural planning. It is not flat. It rises and falls in a series of gentle, carefully constructed levels, an effect that would have been profoundly dramatic. As you walked north, great pyramids and temple platforms would slowly rise into view, then sink away, only to be replaced by even grander structures farther on. This was a form of architectural storytelling, a guided pilgrimage built into the very topography of the city. The destination of this pilgrimage was the colossal Pyramid of the Moon, which stands sentinel at the northern terminus, perfectly framed by the sacred mountain, Cerro Gordo. Behind it, as if the mountain itself were the pyramid's final, natural tier. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. The avenue is nearly 150 feet wide in most places, a vast expanse that would have been filled with people on ceremonial days. The flanking platforms and temples were covered in smooth lime plaster, lightly painted in deep reds and brilliant whites, gleaming under the bright highland sun. It would have been a dazzling, almost overwhelming sight, a stark contrast to the muted, earthy tones of the surrounding valley. This was a space designed to make the individual feel small, to inspire awe and reverence for the power of the city and its gods. What was its purpose? It was undoubtedly a processional way, the stage for the great religious rituals and ceremonies that punctuated the Teotihuacan calendar. Imagine the sound of it, the slow rhythmic beat of drums echoing off the high temple walls, the chant of priests, the soft hiss of sandals on plaster, the scent of burning copal incense, a sweet piney fragrance hanging heavy in the air. Great processions of priests and city leaders, adorned in elaborate costumes of feathers, jade and shells, would have moved slowly along its length. Perhaps they carried effigies of their deities, or led sacrificial victims to the great pyramids. The common people would have watched from the plazas and the tops of the flanking platforms, a massive audience for these sacred dramas. The avenue connected the city's most important religious and political precincts. At its center was the Citadel, a vast sunken square that likely housed the city's rulers, and contained the stunning temple of the feathered serpent. To the north stood the unrivaled Pyramid of the Sun, the third largest pyramid in the world, and finally, the Pyramid of the Moon, the dramatic endpoint of the sacred journey. It was, in essence, a microcosm of the Teotihuacan world. It began near the domain of earthly rule and agriculture, and progressed northward towards the mountains and the celestial supernatural realm. Walking the Avenue of the Dead was a journey from the profane to the sacred, a physical act of moving closer to the gods. But it was more than just a ceremonial space. The avenue was also the city's main street, its social and economic spine. Along its length, and in the great plazas that opened up beside it, markets would have sprung up. People from all over the city, and indeed all over Mesoamerica, would have gathered here to trade, to exchange news, and to simply be a part of the thrumming life of the metropolis. The great platforms that line the avenue were not just for viewing ceremonies. Many of them contained smaller temples, shrines, and perhaps even administrative offices. It was a place where the sacred and the secular blurred together, where a deeply religious ceremony might take place, just feet away from a merchant haggling over the price of cacao beans. This fusion of purposes is key to understanding Teotihuacan. Religion was not something separate from daily life. It infused every aspect of it, from the layout of the city to the transactions in the marketplace. The Avenue of the Dead was the physical manifestation of this worldview, a place where politics, commerce, and cosmology all converged. It was the heart of the city, and through it pulsed the lifeblood of a civilization. As you stand there, even today amidst the quiet ruins, you can almost feel the echo of those footsteps, a million silent journeys that all followed this one sacred path, a road that connected the people not only to each other, but to the earth beneath their feet and the stars far, far above. Leaving the grand public stage of the Avenue of the Dead, let us now turn down one of the narrower side streets, stepping away from the monumental and into the intimate world of the home. Where did the 100,000 or more souls of Teotihuacan live? The answer is one of the city's most unique and fascinating features. The apartment compound. Unlike many ancient cities, Teotihuacan was not a city of small individual family huts. Instead, the vast majority of its population, from craftsmen to priests, lived in large single-story, multi-family residential complexes called conjuntos habitacionales in Spanish. These were the true building blocks of the city, repeated over and over again within the vast grid we first explored. Imagine a city block, a perfect square defined by the city's grid. This entire block would be enclosed by a high, thick, windowless stone wall. From the outside, it would present a blank, imposing face to the street, offering no hint of the life teeming within. These walls provided security and privacy, separating the domestic world from the public one. To enter, you would pass through a single narrow doorway, a threshold that led you from the rigid order of the city's streets into a complex, maze-like interior. Inside, you would not find a single large space, but a carefully planned labyrinth of rooms, open-air patios, and porticoed hallways, all interconnected. A typical compound might house anywhere from 60 to over 100 people, likely members of an extended family or a corporate group bound by kinship and a common craft. Each compound was a miniature, self-contained neighborhood, a world unto itself. The design of these compounds was ingenious, perfectly suited to the climate and the social structure of the city. The heart of the compound, and of each smaller family unit within it, was the open-air patio. These patios were the lungs of the home, allowing sunlight and fresh air to penetrate deep into the structure. They were the centers of domestic life, where food was prepared, children played, and rituals were performed. Often, in the center of the main patio, there was a small altar or shrine, reinforcing the idea that the sacred was not confined to the Great Pyramids, but was also present in the heart of the home. The patios also served a crucial function in water management. Their floors were sloped gently towards a central drain, which channeled precious rainwater into the city's subterranean drainage system, a beautiful example of how everyday life was integrated with the city's sophisticated infrastructure. Surrounding these patios were the living quarters. The rooms themselves were often dark and cool, providing a welcome respite from the intense highland sun. They had flat roofs made of wooden beams, covered with earth and plaster, which would have provided excellent insulation. Light entered not through windows in the outer walls, but from the doorways opening onto the bright sunlit patios. This inward-facing design created a profound sense of community and enclosure. Life was lived collectively, in the shared spaces of the patios and hallways. What is truly remarkable is the quality of these dwellings. Even the compounds of common artisans were solidly built of stone and mortar, with smooth, plastered floors and walls, and many of these walls were not left bare. They were covered in stunning murals, the same artistic tradition we see in the great temples, but here depicting scenes and symbols relevant to the lives of the inhabitants. A potter's compound might have murals related to water deities, while a featherworker's home might be adorned with images of brilliantly plumed birds. This tells us that art and beauty were not luxuries reserved for the elite. They were an integral part of everyday life for many of Teotihuacan's citizens. These compounds were not just places to sleep. They were workshops, schools, and ceremonial centers. Within their walls, specialized crafts were practiced and passed down through generations. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of an obsidian napper, the gentle whir of a spindle, the grinding of corn on a stone metate. These were the sounds of the Teotihuacan home. It was a place of production as much as a place of residence, where the economic and the domestic were completely intertwined. To live in Teotihuacan was to be part of one of these large, bustling, inward-looking communities, a world defined by the high stone walls that both separated you from the city and bound you tightly to your kin and your craft. Now that we have a sense of the spaces people inhabited, both the grand public avenues and the intimate private compounds, let us try to breathe life into them. Let's imagine a day, a single ordinary day in the life of a common family living in Teotihuacan around the year 400 AD. The first light of dawn would be creeping over the eastern mountains, casting the silent, colossal pyramids into sharp silhouette. Within the cool, dark rooms of an apartment compound, a family begins to stir. There is no sudden clamor, but a slow, rhythmic awakening. The air is cool and thin, as it always is in the high valley before the sun truly takes hold. A woman, perhaps a potter or a weaver, would rise first. Her initial task would be to tend to the hearth, in a corner of the open-air patio that her family unit shares with a few others. She would coax the embers from last night's fire back to life. The scent of wood smoke, from pine or oak, would begin to drift through the compound, mingling with the smells of damp earth and plaster. This scent would soon be joined by the aroma of the morning's meal. The cornerstone of the Teotihuacan diet was maize, or corn. The woman, perhaps with her older daughters, would take dried kernels of corn that had been soaked overnight in lime water, a process called nixtamalization that unlocks vital nutrients, and begin the laborious process of grinding it. The sound of this work would be one of the defining sounds of the city's morning, the rhythmic scraping sound of a stone hand roller, the mano, against a trough-shaped grinding stone, the metate. This rhythmic sound would echo from every patio, in every compound, a city-wide chorus of sustenance. From the resulting dough, or masa, she would pat out small, thin cakes and cook them on a hot ceramic griddle called a comal. These tortillas, along with perhaps a warm drink made from maize called a tole, and some beans or squash from the previous night's meal, would form the simple, hearty breakfast. As the sun rose higher, the compound would come alive. The men and older boys would prepare to leave for their day's work. For many, this meant a walk to the fields that surrounded the city, where they would tend the crops of maize, beans, squash, amaranth, and chilies. Others might be craftsmen heading to specialized workshops, perhaps closer to the city center, to knap obsidian blades, craft intricate pottery, or work with feathers and shells. Still others might be laborers, part of the immense crews that were perpetually at work, maintaining the city's great buildings, replastering the walls and floors, and keeping the vast urban machine running. For those who remained in the compound, mostly women, young children, and the elderly, the day was far from idle. The compound itself was a hive of activity. Women would be weaving on backstrap looms, their hands moving with a practiced, graceful efficiency to create cotton cloth or rougher textiles from the fibers of the maguey cactus. They would be crafting the household pottery, tending to small garden plots within the compound, raising turkeys in small pens, and of course caring for the youngest children. The open patios were the children's world, a safe enclosed space where they could play and learn by watching their elders. They would learn the stories of the gods from the murals painted on the walls of their own home, a constant and colorful education in the ways of their world. The midday meal would be simpler, perhaps eaten at the place of work or brought to the fields. The sun at this time would be high and hot, and those who could would seek the shade of a portico or a cool interior room for a brief rest. The afternoon would bring a return to work, the rhythm of life mirroring the path of the sun across the sky. As evening approached, the men and boys would return from the fields and workshops. The family would gather again in the patio, the heart of the home. The evening meal would be prepared, perhaps a stew of beans and vegetables, seasoned with chili and wild herbs, served with fresh tortillas. This was a time for talk, for sharing the day's events, for reinforcing the bonds of family and community. As darkness fell, the compound would grow quiet. The flickering light of a small torch or a ceramic lamp filled with animal fat might cast dancing shadows on the painted walls. Perhaps a grandfather would tell an old story, a myth of the city's founding, or a tale of the great goddess who watched over them. Life was lived in accordance with the cycles of nature and the demands of the community. It was a life of hard work, but also one of deep connection to family, to craft, and to the sacred, ordered world that the city itself represented. And as the family finally settled down to sleep on their woven reed mats or patates, the silence of their dark room would be part of the immense collective quiet of a city of 100,000 souls, all sleeping within the protective embrace of their high compound walls, under the watchful eyes of the same distant silent stars. Let's stay within the warm firelit heart of the apartment compound for a little while longer, and listen to the gentle rhythmic sounds of the kitchen. The story of a people is so often told in the food they eat, in the patient, daily rituals of transforming the gifts of the earth into sustenance. The cuisine of Teotihuacan was the foundation of its strength, a simple yet profoundly nourishing diet that fueled the builders of pyramids and the artists of delicate murals. It was a diet born of the Mexican highlands, a testament to thousands of years of agricultural wisdom. As we've seen, the sacred trinity of Mesoamerican life was maize, beans, and squash. These three crops, grown together in a system called the milpa, supported each other in the field and complemented each other perfectly on the plate, providing a complete protein. The preparation of maize, as we touched upon, was the central defining task of every household. The nixtamalization process, soaking the kernels in an alkaline solution of lime or wood ash, was a remarkable feat of ancient chemistry. It softened the tough outer hull of the corn, making it easier to grind, but more importantly, it released the niacin and amino acids within the corn, making it far more nutritious. Without this crucial step, a society so heavily reliant on maize would have suffered from devastating nutritional deficiencies. This was knowledge passed down from mother to daughter for countless generations, a piece of culinary wisdom as important as any architectural blueprint. The daily, hours-long work of grinding the softened corn on the meadow was a shared labor, often performed by several women together. Their rhythmic movements, a kind of percussive music that accompanied their conversation. The resulting masa was incredibly versatile. It was the basis for the ubiquitous tortillas, of course, but also for tamales, pockets of dough stuffed with beans, squash, or chili, then wrapped in corn husks and steamed. It could be thinned with water to create the nourishing gruel, a tow, which could be sweetened with honey or maguey sap for a comforting morning drink. But the Teotihuacan diet was much richer than just the Three Sisters. The valley and the surrounding hills provided a wide variety of other foods. Amaranth, a hardy grain with a nutty flavor, was another important staple, its seeds ground into flour or popped like corn. Chili peppers, in all their varieties, were essential, not just for their fiery heat, but for the complexity of their flavors and their high vitamin content. Tomatoes and tomatillos would have added a tangy brightness to stews and sauces, and from the great maguey cactus, or agave, came a wealth of resources. Its sweet sap, aguamiel, could be drunk fresh or fermented to create a mildly alcoholic beverage called polka, a drink likely central to social gatherings and certain rituals. The tough fibers of its leaves were used for making rope and cloth, and the heart of the plant could be roasted for days in an underground pit, becoming a sweet and tender delicacy. The prickly pear cactus, or nopal, provided both its fleshy pads, which were cooked as a vegetable, and its sweet fruit, the tuna. It was a landscape of abundance, if you knew how to see it. Protein came not only from beans, but also from hunting and resourceful husbandry. The small hairless dogs we see depicted in some ceramic art were likely a source of meat raised for food, much like pigs in other cultures. Turkeys were domesticated and kept in the compounds, providing both meat and eggs. The people of Teotihuacan also hunted for deer, rabbits, and gophers in the surrounding hills, and they were wonderfully resourceful when it came to smaller creatures. Insects such as grasshoppers and ants would have been toasted and eaten, providing a crunchy, protein-rich supplement to the diet. And from Lake Texcoco, not far to the south, came fish, waterfowl, and a truly unique ingredient, a blue-green algae called spirulina. This algae was harvested from the lake's surface, dried into cakes, and was an incredible source of protein and vitamins, a kind of ancient superfood. The tools of the kitchen were simple but effective. Volcanic stone was shaped into the essential manos and metates, as well as into three-legged bowls called molcajetes, which were used with a stone pestle to grind chilies and other ingredients for sauces. The ancient ancestor of the modern mortar and pestle, pottery crafted within the compounds themselves, provided a wide array of cooking vessels, storage jars, drinking cups, and serving plates. These were not just functional objects, they were often beautifully decorated, another example of how art and utility were woven together in the fabric of daily life. Preparing and sharing food was the ultimate communal act. It was the rhythm that structured the day, the work that bound families together, and the foundation upon which the entire magnificent city was built. It was a quiet, daily miracle, the alchemy of turning sunlight, earth, and water into the energy that carved a cosmos onto the surface of the world. The bustling life of the city, the chorus of grinding stones, the fires in 1,000 hearths, all of it depended on the steady, reliable abundance of the fields that surrounded the great metropolis. Teotihuacan did not rise from a vacuum. It grew from the rich volcanic soil of its valley, a landscape that its people understood with profound intimacy and shaped with remarkable ingenuity. To truly understand the city, we must walk out beyond its plastered walls, past the last of the apartment compounds, and into the sun-drenched agricultural lands that were its lifeblood. The valley of Teotihuacan was not naturally a lush paradise. It's a high-altitude basin with a long dry season and frosts that can threaten crops. The success of the city was therefore a triumph of human engineering, a testament to their ability to manage water and maximize the productivity of their land. One of the most brilliant agricultural techniques they likely employed, especially in the marshy areas closer to the southern lakes, was the use of chinampas, often called floating gardens. This term is a little misleading. They didn't truly float, rather they were man-made islands, built up from the muddy bottom of a shallow lake bed. Farmers would weave together frames of reeds and posts, then pile alternating layers of mud and decaying vegetation inside. This created incredibly fertile, raised planting beds, crisscrossed by canals. The canals provided constant irrigation, with the porous soil of the chinampa wicking moisture directly to the roots of the plants. The mud from the canal bottoms was periodically dredged and added to the top of the beds, constantly replenishing their nutrients. This system was, and still is, one of the most intensive and productive forms of agriculture ever devised. It allowed for multiple harvests per year and supported a dense population, producing vast quantities of maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, and flowers. The canals also provided another resource. They teemed with fish and waterfowl, adding valuable protein to the diet. The chinampa system was a perfectly balanced, self-sustaining ecosystem, a harmonious partnership between human ingenuity and the natural world. In the drier parts of the valley, away from the lakes and springs, farmers practiced other sophisticated techniques. They built terraces on the slopes of the surrounding hills, creating level planting surfaces that prevented soil erosion and helped to retain water. They constructed small dams and canal networks to divert water from the few rivers and seasonal streams, channeling it to their fields. This was a landscape actively managed and meticulously sculpted for maximum yield. The primary crops, as we know, were maize, beans, and squash, grown together in the symbiotic milpa system. The tall maize stalks provided a natural trellis for the bean vines to climb, while the sprawling squash plants with their broad leaves shaded the ground, preventing weeds from growing and helping the soil retain its moisture. Furthermore, the beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, a crucial nutrient that the corn heavily consumes, thus maintaining the fertility of the plot over time. It was a perfect, self-contained guild of plants, a piece of ecological wisdom discovered and perfected over millennia. Other important crops filled the fields as well. Amaranth, with its tall, feathery red plumes, would have created stunning patches of color in the landscape. Chili peppers were grown in abundance, and the maguey cactus was cultivated in vast plantations. its spiky rows marching across the hillsides, a living pantry and tool shed for the city's inhabitants. The relationship between the city and its agricultural hinterland was deeply symbiotic. The food flowed into the city to feed its huge population of artisans, priests, and laborers, while the city provided a market for surplus crops and a source of the tools needed for farming, especially the sharp obsidian blades used for everything from clearing land to harvesting crops. This relationship, however, also shows the immense power of the central authority in Teotihuacan. The sheer scale of the water management systems, the canalization of the San Juan River, the extensive irrigation networks, points to a level of planning and labor mobilization that could only have been directed by a strong state. This wasn't simply a collection of individual farmers. It was a centrally managed agricultural landscape, designed to support a metropolis. The spiritual world also permeated the fields. Rituals would have marked every stage of the agricultural cycle, from the planting of the first seed to the final harvest. Shrines were likely located near important springs, or on hilltops overlooking the valley. The deities who controlled the rain, the sun, and the fertility of the earth, figures like the great storm god, a precursor to the Aztec Tlaloc, would have been honored with offerings to ensure their continued benevolence. Farming was not merely a practical activity, it was a sacred duty, a collaboration with the gods to sustain the world. It was this deep understanding of their environment, this ability to transform it through both hard labor and sacred practice, that allowed the people of Teotihuacan to build a city that for centuries was the largest and most powerful in the Americas. The pyramids were built not just on foundations of stone, but on a foundation of countless golden kernels of maize. In any great city, ancient or modern, the control of water is the secret to life. It is a story of balance, of gathering and storing enough of it for drinking and farming, while also safely channeling away its excess to prevent flooding and disease. For Teotihuacan, a metropolis of over 100,000 people in a semi-arid valley with distinct wet and dry seasons, this challenge was immense. Their solutions were a marvel of engineering, a hidden network of arteries and veins that ran beneath the city's skin, as vital to its existence as the grand avenue of the dead that ran across its surface. This system reveals, perhaps more than any other feature, the incredible foresight and collective effort of the city's planners. One of the most dramatic acts of water engineering was the taming of the San Juan River. This river originally meandered naturally through the center of the valley where the city would be built. The city's planners, in their quest for cosmic order, could not allow such a chaotic natural element to disrupt their perfect grid. So they undertook the monumental task of rerouting it. They dug a massive artificial channel, straight as an arrow that aligned perfectly with their celestial grid. This canalized river flowed directly through the heart of the city, passing right through the center of the citadel compound. This was an incredible feat, requiring the movement of enormous quantities of earth and the construction of stone embankments. It was a powerful statement of the Teotihuacanos' ability to impose their will upon the landscape, transforming nature to fit their sacred design. This main channel then fed into a larger network of canals that distributed water throughout the city, likely for agricultural use in urban gardens and for various workshop activities that required water, such as plaster making and pottery. Equally important was the management of rainfall. During the summer rainy season, torrential downpours could quickly flood the city. To prevent this, the Teotihuacanos designed an intricate and comprehensive drainage system that was built into the very fabric of the city from its inception. Almost every structure, from the grandest pyramid to the most humble apartment compound, was designed to manage water. The large open plazas and the interior patios of the residential compounds were all meticulously sloped. Their smooth, plastered surfaces acted like giant funnels, collecting the rainwater and directing it towards small stone-lined drains. These drains then fed into a larger, unseen subterranean network. Imagine a hidden city of tunnels and conduits running beneath the floors of the buildings and the pavement of the streets. These underground channels, some large enough for a person to crawl through, were all carefully graded to use gravity to carry the stormwater away, eventually emptying it into the canalized San Juan River and out of the city. This system was so effective that it kept the city free from damaging floods and the pools of stagnant water that can breed disease. a major factor in the city's ability to sustain such a large, dense population for centuries. It was a form of sanitation and public health infrastructure that was centuries ahead of its time. The system also speaks to the collective mindset of the city's inhabitants. The drains from one apartment compound had to connect perfectly to the drains of its neighbors, and those to the larger street drains. The entire city was a single, integrated water management machine. This required an incredible degree of cooperation and central planning. Every new building had to be constructed in accordance with the master plan for the city's drainage. This is further evidence of a powerful state or governing body that could not only conceive of such a system, but also enforce its implementation across the entire 8-square-mile metropolis. The water itself was of course seen as a sacred force. The great storm god, often depicted with goggle eyes and fangs, was one of the most important deities in the Teotihuacan pantheon. He was the bringer of the life-giving rains that nourished the crops, but he could also be a destructive force, unleashing violent storms and floods. The city's water management system can be seen as a way of honoring and controlling this divine power. By channeling the water, by imposing order upon it, the Teotihuacanos were entering into a partnership with this powerful deity, showing their respect while also ensuring their own survival. The sound of water would have been a constant presence in the city, the rush of rain on plastered patios, the gurgle of water disappearing into a drain, the steady flow of the great canals. It was the quiet, constant pulse of the city, a testament to the ingenuity of a people who understood that their monumental stone world could only survive if they paid careful attention to the most fluid and essential of elements. As the sun rises over the city, and the farmers head out to the fields, a different kind of work begins within the high walls of the apartment compounds. This is the hum of production, the sound of a city that was not just a ceremonial center, but a great industrial powerhouse. The sheer size and organization of Teotihuacan allowed for a level of craft specialization rarely seen in the ancient world. People were not just farmers who made things in their spare time. They were full-time, dedicated artisans, masters of a single craft, whose skills were the engine of the city's economy and the source of its immense influence across Mesoamerica. This specialization was the key to Teotihuacan's prosperity. Let's wander through the city's neighborhoods, away from the ceremonial core. Here, entire compounds, entire districts were dedicated to specific trades. This organization was no accident. The city's planners seem to have designated certain areas for certain industries. This zoning had practical benefits, allowing artisans in the same trade to share resources, knowledge, and perhaps even large-scale facilities like kilns. It also likely had social and ritual significance, with each craft having its own patron deity, its own ceremonies, and its own unique identity within the city's complex social tapestry. Imagine walking into a neighborhood of potters. The air would be thick with the smell of damp clay and wood smoke from the kilns. In the patios of the compounds, you would see people at every stage of the pottery-making process. Some would be mixing the clay with temper, such as sand or volcanic ash, to strengthen it. Others would be skillfully shaping the vessels by hand, using coiling techniques or molds to create standardized forms. Still others would be carefully painting the unfired pots with intricate designs, geometric patterns, symbolic animals, or the faces of gods. And finally, you would see the great communal kilns, where the pots were fired to a hard, durable finish. Teotihuacan was famous for its distinctive pottery, especially a beautiful, thin-walled orange ware that was traded all over Mesoamerica. This was not the work of amateurs, it was the product of generations of accumulated knowledge and skill. In another part of the city, you might find the lapidary workshops. Here the work was quieter, more focused. Artisans would be hunched over small pieces of greenstone, jadeite, or serpentine, patiently grinding and drilling the precious materials to create beads, ear spools, pendants, and the tiny stone tiles used to create breathtaking mosaics. They used simple tools, drills made of reed or bone, with sand as an abrasive, but their results were exquisite. They crafted the funeral masks found in elite burials, serene human faces made of polished stone, with eyes of obsidian or shell. This was slow, meticulous work that required immense patience and a deep understanding of the stone's properties. These luxury goods were symbols of power and wealth, reserved for the city's elite and for export to foreign nobles who wished to associate themselves with the prestige of Teotihuacan. Perhaps most importantly, as we will explore in more detail, were the obsidian workshops. The sound of these districts would have been the sharp, percussive crack of stone on stone. Teotihuacan controlled some of the finest sources of obsidian in Mesoamerica, and it turned this volcanic glass into a vast industry. Entire neighborhoods were littered with the debris from this work, millions upon millions of tiny green, gray, and black flakes, the leftovers from the production of countless blades, projectile points, and ceremonial objects. The skill of the Teotihuacan obsidian knappers was legendary. They could produce incredibly long, thin, razor-sharp blades using a technique called pressure flaking, a skill that took a lifetime to master. These blades were the city's primary export and the foundation of its economic dominance. These workshops were more than just workplaces. They were schools where skills were passed from parent to child, and they were communities where a shared craft created a powerful social bond. The murals within these compounds often reflect the work done there, depicting the tools of the trade or the gods thought to oversee it. To be a craftsman in Teotihuacan was to have a defined place in the world, a role within the great urban organism. It was this vast organized network of skilled artisans, each contributing their unique talent, that made the city more than just a place of pyramids, but a vibrant, creative, and economic force that shaped the destiny of an entire continent. Of all the crafts practiced in the bustling workshops of Teotihuacan, none was more important, more foundational to the city's power and wealth, than the working of obsidian. This material, a naturally occurring volcanic glass, was the steel of the ancient Americas. It is formed when molten lava cools so rapidly that crystals cannot form, resulting in a glass-like substance that is incredibly hard, and when fractured, produces the sharpest edge known to man. An edge many times sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. Teotihuacan was blessed by geology, situated near two of the most significant obsidian sources in all of Mesoamerica, a source of high-quality gray obsidian at Otumba, and more importantly, a source of unique, beautiful green obsidian from Pachuca. The control of these two sources gave Teotihuacan a near monopoly on the most vital raw material of its time. The city did not just control the mines. It transformed the raw material into a massive state-controlled industry. Raw chunks of obsidian, or large prepared cores, were brought from the mines to the city. Here, in hundreds of dedicated workshops concentrated in specific neighborhoods, an army of highly skilled artisans set to work. The scale of this production is staggering. Excavations of these workshop sites have revealed dense layers of obsidian debitage, the waste flakes from production that are several feet thick in places, containing literally millions of fragments. This was industrial-scale production, far beyond what was needed for the city's own use. Teotihuacan was arming and equipping not just itself, but a vast part of the Mesoamerican world. The workshops produced a range of tools. The most common were prismatic blades. Using a sophisticated technique involving a chest-held tool called a crutch, a master craftsman could apply immense controlled pressure to a carefully prepared obsidian core, peeling off incredibly long, thin, uniform blades. These blades were razor-sharp, and were the all-purpose cutting tool of the day, used for everything from preparing food and working hides to delicate ritual bloodletting. Beyond these utilitarian blades, the workshops produced a vast arsenal of weaponry. Spear points and dart points, known as atlatl darts, were mass-produced. The atlatl, or spear thrower, was a powerful weapon that greatly increased the range and velocity of a dart, and the obsidian points made these weapons incredibly lethal. The ability to produce these points in huge quantities gave Teotihuacan a significant military advantage. But the artisans also created objects of incredible beauty and symbolic power. They crafted large, eccentrically shaped flints and obsidian pieces, chipped into elaborate forms like serpents, human profiles, or abstract zigzags. These were not tools, but powerful ritual objects, likely used by priests in ceremonies, or placed in caches as offerings to the gods. They also made mirrors from obsidian, polished to a deep, black, reflective sheen. These were not just for vanity, they were considered sacred objects, portals to the supernatural world, used by diviners to scry the future. The unique green obsidian from the Pachuca source was especially prized for these high-status and ritual items, its beautiful translucent green color making it almost gem-like. The organization of this industry tells us a great deal about the structure of Teotihuacan society. Some scholars believe the state controlled the obsidian mines directly, and that the initial preparation of the large cores was done by state-attached specialists. These cores were then distributed to the hundreds of smaller workshops throughout the city, many of which may have been family-run businesses operating within the apartment compounds. These families would then produce the finished blades and points, perhaps paying a tribute or tax back to the state in the form of finished goods. This created a complex economic system, a kind of ancient public-private partnership. The state controlled the resource and the initial stages of production, while the private households handled the final, skilled stages. This vast output of obsidian goods became Teotihuacan's primary export. Green obsidian from Pachuca, which can be traced geochemically, is found at archaeological sites all over Mesoamerica, from the deserts of northern Mexico to the jungles of Guatemala and Belize. The presence of a Teotihuacan-made obsidian blade in a distant village was more than just a trade good. It was a symbol of the city's long reach, its economic dominance, and its technological superiority. To hold one of these blades was to hold a piece of Teotihuacan's power in your hand. The sharp, glittering black and green glass was the bedrock of an empire built not on gold or silver, but on the careful, skillful, and relentless transformation of cooled volcanic fire. While the hard, sharp, and enduring nature of obsidian has left a very clear trace in the archaeological record, the softer side of Teotihuacan's industry, the world of fibers and textiles, is far more ephemeral. Cloth rarely survives the passage of centuries, so our understanding of it must be woven together from more subtle clues. The discovery of spindle whorls and weaving tools, the impressions of fabric left on pottery, and most vividly, the detailed depictions of clothing shown in the city's glorious murals and on its small ceramic figurines. From these fragments, a rich and colorful picture emerges, one that reveals that textiles were not just for warmth and modesty, but were a vital part of the economy, social identity, and religious expression. The primary fibers used were cotton and various plant fibers from the maguey and yucca plants. Cotton, which does not grow in the high, cool valley of Teotihuacan, had to be imported, likely from the warmer coastal regions. It was a luxury good, and its transformation into thread was a laborious process. The raw cotton had to be cleaned and carded, then spun into thread using a simple but effective tool, the drop spindle. This was essentially a thin wooden stick weighted at one end, with a small fired clay disc called a spindle whorl. Thousands of these small decorated whorls have been found throughout the city, a testament to the fact that spinning was a constant, ubiquitous activity, likely performed by women in their spare moments throughout the day. A woman could spin thread while walking, while watching her children, or while talking with her neighbors in the patio. The gentle whir of the spindle would have been another of the city's constant domestic sounds. The fibers from the maguey cactus were more readily available. The tough leaves were soaked and scraped to extract long, strong fibers, which were then spun into a rougher thread suitable for making nets, bags, sandals, and more utilitarian clothing. The thread was then woven into cloth on a backstrap loom, a simple and portable device that has been used in Mesoamerica for thousands of years. The loom consists of two main bars. One is tied to a post or a tree, and the other is attached to a strap that goes around the weaver's back. By leaning forward or backward, the weaver can control the tension of the vertical threads. The warp, the horizontal threads, the weft are then passed through the warp using a wooden shuttle. It is a physically demanding process, requiring great skill and concentration to create a tight, even weave. The murals show us that the women of Teotihuacan were masters of this art. They could create complex patterns and designs directly in the weave, a technique known as brocading. They used natural dyes derived from plants, insects, and minerals to create a vibrant palette of colors. A brilliant red was made from the cochineal insect, which lives on the nopal cactus. Yellows came from flowers, and a deep, rich blue was derived from the indigo plant, another valuable trade good. Clothing in Teotihuacan was a clear indicator of social status, gender, and occupation. Common men typically wore a simple loincloth, and perhaps a cloak, or tilma, knotted over one shoulder, especially in the cool mornings and evenings. Women wore a wraparound skirt and a blouse-like upper garment called a quechquemitl, a distinctive poncho-like garment that is still worn in some parts of Mexico today. These basic garments would have been made from maguey fiber or plain cotton. The elite, however, wore spectacular and elaborate outfits. The murals show priests and nobles dressed in large, intricately decorated cotton mantles, covered in feathers, shells, and embroidered symbols. They wore elaborate headdresses that were towering constructions of precious feathers, especially the long, iridescent green tail feathers of the quetzal bird, which had to be imported from the distant cloud forests of southern Mesoamerica. These headdresses were not just decorative, they were powerful symbols of authority and divine connection. Warriors, too, had their own distinct attire, including padded cotton armor that was surprisingly effective at stopping the obsidian-tipped darts of their enemies. They wore helmets carved to look like the heads of coyotes, eagles, or jaguars, perhaps to channel the power of these formidable animals. Textiles were not just clothing, they were a canvas for communicating a person's place in the cosmic and social order. Every color, every pattern, every symbol woven into a piece of cloth held meaning. A mantle was not just a mantle, it was a statement of who you were, what you did, and what God you served. It was a fragile, beautiful, and deeply personal part of the identity of every person who called the great city of Teotihuacan home. With all of these goods being produced, shimmering obsidian blades, stacks of vibrant pottery, bolts of colorful woven cloth, and a surplus of food from the fertile valley. Where did it all go? The answer lies in the heart of the city, in the great, bustling marketplaces that were the nexus of Teotihuacan's economic life. While the Avenue of the Dead was the city's ceremonial spine, the marketplace was its thrumming, beating heart. Archaeologists believe a massive open space, now called the Great Compound, located directly across the avenue from the citadel, was the city's main marketplace. It was a vast, formally planned complex, with large plazas and surrounding rooms that likely served as storerooms and administrative offices. Let's imagine this space on a market day. It would be a dizzying, overwhelming spectacle of sights, sounds, and smells. The huge plaza would be crowded with thousands of people from every corner of the city and the surrounding countryside. Farmers would be sitting on reed mats behind neat piles of their produce, mounds of red tomatoes, green chilies and yellow squash, baskets of beans and amaranth, and stacks of fresh tortillas. Potters would have their wares spread out, the sun gleaming on the smooth orange surfaces of their pots and plates. Obsidian workers would display their sharp, glittering blades, carefully bundled together. Weavers would hang their colorful textiles, creating a vibrant tapestry of reds, blues, and yellows. The air would be filled with the chatter of a dozen different languages and dialects, the cries of vendors advertising their goods, the smell of cooking food from small food stalls, and the earthy scent of produce and people. It would be a place of incredible energy and diversity. The economy of Teotihuacan did not use money in the way we do. It was a system based on barter and tribute. A farmer might trade a basket of beans for a new cooking pot. A craftswoman might exchange a finely woven belt for a set of obsidian blades for her kitchen. However, some goods served as a kind of currency, a standardized medium of exchange for more valuable transactions. Cacao beans, the source of chocolate, were highly prized and had to be imported from the tropical lowlands. They were light, portable, and valuable, and were often used to make purchases. Fine textiles, too, could serve as a form of wealth. The value of goods was determined by a complex, culturally understood system based on the rarity of the raw materials, the amount of labor involved, and the skill of the artisan. The state likely played a significant role in regulating the market, perhaps with officials present to resolve disputes, check weights and measures, and collect taxes on the goods being sold. The rooms surrounding the Great Compound may have been where these officials worked, and where tribute goods, collected from conquered territories or paid by resident craftsmen, were stored. But the flow of goods did not stop at the city's edge. Teotihuacan was the hub of a vast, continent-spanning trade network. This was a trade of epic proportions, carried out not on wheeled vehicles or by pack animals, as neither were used in Mesoamerica, but on the backs of human porters, known as tlamims. These hardy traders traveled in long caravans, following ancient footpaths that stretched for hundreds, even thousands of miles. They journeyed south into the dense jungles of the Maya region, east to the Gulf Coast, and west towards the Pacific. From Teotihuacan, they carried the city's signature products, the mass-produced obsidian tools and weapons, the elegant thin orange pottery, and perhaps fine textiles. These were the exports that fueled the city's economy and spread its influence. In return, the caravans came back laden with the exotic raw materials and luxury goods that the city's elite craved and its artisans needed. From the Maya lands came the brilliant green feathers of the quetzal bird and the tough, spotted pelts of the jaguar, both essential for the regalia of priests and nobles. From the Gulf Coast came rubber, used to make balls for the ritual ball game, and the sacred cacao beans. From distant coastal areas came seashells of all shapes and sizes, which were used to make jewelry, trumpets, and inlays. Greenstones, like jadeite, were imported from as far away as the Motagua Valley in Guatemala. This constant, two-way flow of goods was like a great circulatory system, with Teotihuacan as its heart, pumping its manufactured goods out to the extremities and drawing in the raw, precious lifeblood of the wider world. This economic power was inseparable from its cultural and political power. The trade networks were not just for goods, they were conduits for ideas, for artistic styles, and for religious beliefs, all of which radiated outward from this great, central metropolis. The immense gravity of Teotihuacan, its economic power and cultural prestige, did not just pull in exotic goods from distant lands, it also pulled in people. For centuries, the city was a magnet for immigrants, merchants, and ambassadors from all over Mesoamerica. It was a truly cosmopolitan metropolis, a melting pot of different languages, ethnicities, and traditions. This diversity is most clearly seen in the presence of entire neighborhoods, or barrios, that were occupied by people from foreign lands who had come to live, work, and trade in the great city. These enclaves were a testament to Teotihuacan's role as the diplomatic and commercial capital of its world. One of the most well-studied of these foreign quarters is the barrio of the Zapotec people, who came from the region of Oaxaca, far to the south. In the western part of the city, archaeologists have found a distinct neighborhood that feels like a piece of Oaxaca transplanted into the heart of Teotihuacan. The people who lived here built their homes in the typical Teotihuacan apartment compound style, conforming to the city's rigid grid. But within these compounds, they maintained their own distinct traditions. They built stone-lined tombs beneath the floors of their patios, a classic Zapotec burial custom that is very different from the typical Teotihuacan practice of burying the dead in simple pits. Within these tombs, they placed their deceased relatives along with pottery made in a pure Zapotec style, including distinctive urns depicting their own deities. They even brought their own writing system with them, carving Zapotec glyphs on stone monuments within their neighborhood. This tells us that they were not simply assimilated into Teotihuacan society. They were a distinct self-governing community, maintaining their own language, religion, and customs, all while living and working within the larger framework of the host city. They were likely ambassadors, merchants, and craftsmen who managed the trade and diplomatic relations between the two powerful states of Teotihuacan and Monte Alban, the Zapotec capital. Their presence suggests a formal, state-level relationship, a kind of ancient embassy. On the other side of the city, in the eastern district, was another fascinating foreign enclave, this one associated with people from the Maya region of Guatemala and the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Here again, the residents lived in Teotihuacan-style apartment compounds, but the artifacts found within tell a different story. Archaeologists have discovered caches of beautiful, brightly colored Maya-style pottery, completely different from the local wares. They have also found evidence of Maya artistic styles in the murals painted on the compound walls, and even fragments of the Maya writing system, the most complex and sophisticated script in the ancient Americas. The people living here may have been merchants managing the trade in tropical goods like cacao and quetzal feathers. Some scholars also believe that they may have been members of the Maya elite, perhaps even a deposed royal family from a great city like Tikal, who had come to live under the protection, or perhaps the control, of the powerful Teotihuacan state. The existence of these enclaves paints a picture of a surprisingly tolerant and cosmopolitan city. The rulers of Teotihuacan clearly allowed these foreign groups to maintain their cultural identities. This was likely a very pragmatic strategy. By providing a safe and stable home for foreign merchants and diplomats, the city could better manage its crucial long-distance trade relationships and its complex political alliances. These neighborhoods were the hubs of international commerce and diplomacy, the places where different worlds met. Imagine the conversations in the patios of these compounds, where the languages of Teotihuacan, Oaxaca, and the Maya lands would have mingled. Imagine the exchange not just of goods but of ideas, of technologies, of religious beliefs, and of political strategies. These foreign quarters were the vital contact points, the synapses, in the great neural network of Mesoamerica. They made Teotihuacan a true world city, a place where you could see the faces, hear the voices, and touch the products of a dozen different civilizations, all gathered together in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. The city was not just a monolithic, uniform entity. It was a vibrant mosaic, a patchwork of different cultures living together, a testament to its power to draw the entire known world into its orbit. The relationship between Teotihuacan and the civilizations of the Maya lowlands, over 600 miles to the southeast, is one of the most intriguing and debated chapters in Mesoamerican history. It was a complex and dynamic interaction that forever changed the political and cultural landscape of the Maya world. For a long time, scholars believed this relationship was primarily one of peaceful trade and cultural influence. The evidence for this is abundant. Teotihuacan-style pottery, especially the distinctive tripod vases with slab feet and lids, became incredibly popular among the Maya elite. The architectural style of Teotihuacan, known as talud tablero, a distinctive pattern of a sloping wall, the talud topped by a vertical rectangular panel, the tablero was copied in major Maya cities. Imagery associated with Teotihuacan's deities, particularly the storm god, began to appear in Maya art. It seemed as though the powerful culture of Teotihuacan was simply a fashionable trend that the Maya chose to emulate, a sign of their connection to the most prestigious city of the age. However, in recent decades, a much more dramatic and complex picture has emerged, thanks largely to the decipherment of Maya hieroglyphic writing. The Maya, unlike the people of Teotihuacan, who left no decipherable script of their own, recorded their history in stone. And these texts tell a story not just of trade, but of direct, and likely military, intervention. One of the most significant events is recorded on a monument at the great Maya city of Tikal, in modern-day Guatemala. The text states that on a specific day in the year 378 AD, a powerful individual named Teotihuacan, which translates to fire is born, arrived in Tikal. On that very same day, the king of Tikal, Teotihuacan, or Great Jaguar Paw, died. The inscription makes it clear that Teotihuacan was a foreigner, that he came from the west, and that he was associated with a powerful figure from Teotihuacan, referred to as Spearthrower Owl. Following this event, a new dynasty was established at Tikal. The new king was the young son of Spearthrower Owl, and he was installed on the throne under the authority of the warlord Teotihuacan. This was no mere cultural exchange. This was a coup, a regime change orchestrated by Teotihuacan. It seems that Teotihuacan sent a military force, led by its general Teotihuacan, to conquer one of the most powerful Maya city-states, and install a ruler of its own choosing. This new dynasty at Tikal then proceeded to adopt a great deal of Teotihuacan iconography and symbolism. The new kings were often depicted in Teotihuacan-style warrior costumes, carrying the atlasal spear thrower, and wearing the goggle-eyed imagery of the storm god. They were signaling their direct connection to, and likely their subservience to, the great power in the West. This event had a ripple effect across the Maya world. Other cities, like Copan in Honduras, also saw the establishment of new dynasties, with clear links to Teotihuacan shortly after this period. It seems that Teotihuacan was actively meddling in the politics of the Maya region, using its military might to install friendly rulers who would ensure access to the vital trade routes for cacao, quetzal feathers, and other tropical goods. This more aggressive interpretation is supported by art found at Teotihuacan itself. While the city's murals often depict processions of priests or abstract deities, There are also clear images of warriors. Some murals show animals like coyotes, pumas, and eagles dressed in military gear, carrying shields and spear throwers. These are likely representations of different military orders or warrior cults. The city was not just a peaceful center of commerce and religion. It possessed a formidable military machine, one that it was willing to project over vast distances to secure its interests. The relationship with the Maya was therefore a mixture of soft and hard power. The immense cultural prestige of Teotihuacan made its goods and styles desirable, giving it a powerful cultural influence. But when its economic or political interests were threatened, it was not afraid to use the hard power of its armies to impose its will. For the Maya kings of the 4th and 5th centuries, Teotihuacan was a distant but ever-present reality, a source of both coveted luxury goods and profound political danger. It was the superpower of their world, a force to be emulated, feared, and respected. In a city as vast and complex as Teotihuacan, a city of grand pyramids, sprawling apartment compounds, and specialized workshops, it is clear that not everyone was equal. Like all great urban centers, it was a stratified society, a human pyramid that in many ways mirrored the great stone pyramids that dominated its skyline. While the lack of a written language makes it difficult to know the precise titles and roles people held, archaeology, art, and the very architecture of the city itself allow us to sketch the outlines of its social hierarchy, from the powerful, almost invisible rulers at the top to the humble farmers who formed its base. At the apex of this pyramid were the city's rulers. This is perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Teotihuacan society. Unlike the Maya, who celebrated their kings with countless portraits and inscriptions, the rulers of Teotihuacan seem to have been deliberately anonymous. We have found no grand statues of individual kings, no tombs that can be definitively identified as belonging to a specific named ruler. This has led some scholars to suggest that the city may not have been a traditional monarchy, but was perhaps ruled by a council of powerful nobles, the heads of different lineages or military orders. Others believe it was a theocracy, ruled by a high priest or a college of priests. Whatever the system, there was clearly a powerful central authority. The sheer scale of the city's planning, the construction of the pyramids, and the organization of its vast trade networks all point to a small elite group with immense power to command labor and resources. The art gives us hints of what these elites looked like. They are the figures depicted in the most elaborate costumes in the murals, wearing immense feather headdresses, heavy jade necklaces, and complex symbolic attire. They are the ones who lived in the most luxurious apartment compounds, palaces really, near the city's core, with larger rooms, more numerous patios, and the most exquisitely painted murals. The Citadel compound, with its connection to the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, may well have been the primary royal palace, the administrative and residential heart of the state. Below this ruling elite was a broad and diverse intermediate class of priests, high-ranking warriors, and successful artisans. The priests were the keepers of the sacred calendars, the astronomers who read the stars, and the intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. They would have presided over the great public ceremonies on the Avenue of the Dead and the private rituals within the compounds. The warrior class, as we have seen, was also of great importance. High-ranking military leaders, perhaps the heads of the coyote or eagle warrior orders, would have commanded great prestige and wealth, especially after successful campaigns that brought tribute and captives back to the city. This intermediate stratum also included the master craftsmen, the heads of the major workshops for obsidian, pottery, and luxury goods. These individuals, while not part of the ruling political class, could accumulate significant wealth through their trade, and may have enjoyed a high standard of living, their status reflected in the size and decoration of their apartment compounds. The vast majority of the city's population formed the base of the social pyramid. This was the great class of commoners. This group, however, was not a uniform mass. It included a wide range of people, from skilled but ordinary craftspeople in the city's workshops, to the construction laborers who did the heavy work of building and maintaining the metropolis. At the very bottom were the farmers who lived both in the city and in the surrounding countryside, whose labor in the fields produced the food that sustained everyone else. While their lives were simpler, and their homes less ornate than those of the elite, The archaeological evidence suggests that the overall standard of living, even for commoners, was relatively high in Teotihuacan. The well-built apartment compounds provided solid, private housing for all, and the abundance of food from the highly productive agricultural system meant that most people were well fed. This relatively high standard of living for the common populace may have been one of the keys to the city's long-term stability. It was a society with clear and rigid class divisions, but one that also seemed to provide a basic level of security and prosperity for the majority of its citizens, ensuring their continued participation in the great collective project of the city. Everyone had their place, from the godlike figures at the top to the farmer in the field, all working together to maintain the cosmic order that the city itself so powerfully embodied. Let us step out of the bright sun of the plazas and into the cool, painted interiors of the city's buildings. For it is here, on the smooth, plastered walls of temples, palaces, and even common apartment compounds, that the people of Teotihuacan left their most vibrant and enigmatic messages. The city was a canvas, and its mural art is a window, albeit a sometimes cloudy one, into its soul, its beliefs, and its vision of the cosmos. The Teotihuacanos were master painters, and they developed a unique and powerful artistic style that is instantly recognizable. The technique itself was a form of fresco. Artists would apply a fine layer of lime plaster to a wall, and then paint on it while the plaster was still damp. This bonded the mineral-based pigments to the wall, making the paintings remarkably durable. Their color palette was rich and symbolic, dominated by a deep, earthy red that often served as the background for their compositions. They also used blues, greens, yellows, and whites to create their stunning images. The style is not naturalistic or realistic in the way we might think of it. It is highly stylized and symbolic. The figures are flat, depicted in profile, and are defined by bold, clear outlines, a style that has been compared to modern comic books or graphic novels. There is little sense of depth or perspective. This was not a lack of skill. It was a deliberate choice. The goal was not to replicate the world as it appeared to the eye, but to depict the underlying structure of the cosmos, the world of the gods, myths, and sacred energies. The subject matter of the murals is vast and complex. In the great temples and elite compounds, we see grand processions of priests or nobles. They walk in stately lines, scattering seeds or incense from decorated pouches. Their headdresses elaborate constructions of feathers and divine symbols. Animals are a common theme, but they are rarely just animals. Coyotes, pumas, and eagles are often shown dressed as warriors, carrying weapons and shields, likely representing military orders. The feathered serpent, a powerful deity associated with creation and fertility, slithers across many walls. Spiders, owls, and jaguars, creatures of the night and the underworld, also feature prominently, reminding the viewer of the ever-present supernatural forces that governed life and death. The most famous and complex mural is found in an apartment compound called Tepantitla. Here, a vast mural depicts what many believe to be the paradise of the storm god. In the upper part of the mural, a great deity, often identified as the great goddess of Teotihuacan, stands with a flowering tree emerging from her head, bestowing a bounty of water and seeds upon the world. Below, in a lush green landscape, tiny human figures are shown playing, swimming, and chasing butterflies. It is a vision of an idyllic afterlife, a place of endless joy and abundance, a reward for those who lived in accordance with the city's sacred ways. But murals were not confined to the elite. Many of the humbler artisan compounds also had painted walls. These murals were often simpler, but no less meaningful. They might depict the tools of a particular craft, or the patron deity who was thought to oversee that work. This shows that art was not a luxury. It was an essential part of life, a way of sanctifying one's home and one's work. The murals were a form of public communication, a shared visual language that everyone in this multi-ethnic city could understand, regardless of the language they spoke. The repeating symbols, the goggle-eyed storm god, the feathered serpent, the four-petaled flower representing the four cardinal directions, were a constant reinforcement of the city's official ideology and cosmology. They reminded the inhabitants of the gods they served, the social order they were a part of, and their place in the universe. Walking through the city, with its brightly painted buildings, would have been like walking through a sacred book. Every wall told a story, every image was a prayer. The murals transformed the stone and plaster of the city into a living, breathing testament to the profound and deeply held beliefs of its people. The grand avenues, the towering pyramids, and the symbolic murals all served one ultimate purpose. They were the stage and the backdrop for the city's rich and constant cycle of religious rituals and ceremonies. For the people of Teotihuacan, the world was a living, breathing entity, animated by powerful and often dangerous supernatural forces. The gods were not distant or abstract. They were present in the rain that fell, the corn that grew, and the fire that warmed the hearth. Maintaining a proper relationship with these forces through ritual was not just a matter of belief, it was a matter of survival. The continuation of the world depended on it. The religious calendar was likely complex, intertwining a 260-day sacred calendar with a 365-day solar calendar. The meshing of these two cycles created a larger 52-year cycle, and the end of each of these cycles would have been a time of great importance, marked by massive citywide ceremonies to ensure the new fire of the sun would be reborn and the world would not end. These great public rituals would have taken place on the Avenue of the Dead and in the great plazas before the pyramids of the sun and the moon. Imagine these plazas filled with tens of thousands of people, a vast audience for the sacred drama unfolding on the pyramid steps. Priests, adorned in the spectacular regalia we see in the murals, would have led the ceremonies. The air would be thick with the smoke of burning copal incense and the sound of drums, rattles, and shell trumpets. These were multi-sensory experiences designed to overwhelm the individual and create a powerful sense of collective awe and unity. The ceremonies likely involved processions, chanting, dancing, and the presentation of offerings to the gods. These offerings could include food, precious textiles, jade, and shells, but also offerings of blood, a substance seen as incredibly potent and life-giving. Priests and nobles would have performed acts of auto-sacrifice, piercing their tongues or ears with sharp obsidian blades or stingray spines, and offering their own blood to nourish the gods. But ritual was not limited to these grand public spectacles. It was also an intimate and daily part of life within the apartment compounds. Every compound had its own shrines and altars, located in the central patios. Here, the family or kin group would have conducted their own private ceremonies. They would have made offerings to the patron deities of their craft, or to the ancestors who were buried beneath the floors of their homes. Small hand-modeled ceramic incense burners called candelabras are found in huge numbers in the compounds, evidence of the constant small-scale burning of incense. Families would have celebrated births, marriages, and deaths with their own rituals, marking the passage of life within the sacred space of the home. The murals on their own walls would have served as a constant reminder of the gods and myths that gave meaning to their lives. This domestic religion was just as important as the great state ceremonies. It was the foundation of piety, the place where children first learned the stories of the gods and the importance of reciprocity, the idea that one must give back to the gods in order to receive their blessings. Fire and water were two of the most important elements in Teotihuacan ritual. Fire was seen as a transformative force, a connection to the divine. An old fire god, depicted as an elderly man carrying a brazier on his head, was one of the most ancient and venerated deities. Rituals involving fire, from the grand new fire ceremony to the simple lighting of incense in the home, were central to their worship. Water, as we've seen, was equally sacred. The storm god was a primary deity, and rituals would have been performed to petition him for rain. Caves and springs were seen as sacred places, openings into the watery underworld from which life emerged. A man-made cave discovered beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, with chambers shaped like a four-petaled flower, was undoubtedly a major ritual space, a place where the rulers of the city could connect directly with the sacred forces of the earth. Religion at Teotihuacan was an all-encompassing system. It provided a cosmology, a moral code, and a structure for society. The endless cycle of rituals, both large and small, was the mechanism that kept the universe in balance and ensured the continued existence of the great city that saw itself as the very center of that universe. We must now turn to a more somber and difficult aspect of Teotihuacan's ritual life, but one that is essential to understanding their worldview. Within their deeply held beliefs about reciprocity and the need to nourish the gods, there was a place for the ultimate offering, human life. The practice of human sacrifice, while unsettling to our modern sensibilities, was a deeply ingrained and sacred part of many Mesoamerican cultures. And Teotihuacan was no exception. For them, this was not an act of cruelty for its own sake, but a solemn and necessary duty to maintain cosmic order. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world and the sun, and humanity in turn had a sacred obligation to repay this debt with the most precious thing it could offer, chalquihuatl, or precious water, a term for human blood and life. The most dramatic evidence for this practice at Teotihuacan comes from the Great Pyramids themselves. During excavations of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, in the heart of the citadel, archaeologists made a series of stunning and grim discoveries. Buried beneath and within the structure were the remains of over 200 individuals. These were not typical burials of revered ancestors. These were dedicatory sacrifices, individuals who were killed and interred as part of the rituals to consecrate the pyramid. The victims were predominantly young men, and the arrangement of their bodies tells a clear story. Many were found with their hands tied behind their backs. They were dressed as warriors, adorned with collars made of imitation human jaws and other military regalia. They were not from Teotihuacan. Isotope analysis of their teeth shows they grew up in distant lands. These were likely foreign warriors, captives taken in battle, who were brought to the city and sacrificed to sanctify one of its most important temples. Other victims associated with the pyramid included young women, perhaps attendants meant to accompany a great lord or the god himself into the underworld. The sheer scale and systematic nature of these sacrifices show that this was a state-sponsored ritual of immense importance. It was a demonstration of the state's military power and its ability to command the ultimate sacrifice to appease its gods. Similar though less extensive, sacrificial deposits have been found at the pyramids of the Sun and the Moon. At the Pyramid of the Moon, excavations have revealed a series of tombs, each built to commemorate a new construction phase of the pyramid. These tombs contained not only the remains of sacrificed animals, such as eagles, pumas, jaguars, and serpents, all potent symbols of power, but also human victims. One burial contained the bound and decapitated remains of several individuals, their heads placed separately as part of the offering. Like the victims at the Feathered Serpent Temple, many of these individuals were foreigners, again suggesting they were captured warriors. The iconography of the city also supports the importance of sacrifice. While not as explicit as later Aztec art, Teotihuacan murals and ceramics do show images related to this practice. Priests are shown holding large obsidian knives, and hearts are sometimes depicted. The military orders represented by the coyotes and eagles were intimately involved in this process, as their primary duty was to acquire the captives needed for these essential rituals. It's important to approach this topic with a sense of quiet respect for the beliefs of the people involved. For the Teotihuacanos, these acts were not a celebration of death, but a powerful affirmation of life. The universe was seen as a precarious and finely balanced system. The sun might not rise, the rains might not come, the corn might not grow, if the gods were not properly fed and honored. The sacrifice of a human life, especially that of a valiant warrior from an enemy state, was thought to release a powerful burst of life energy that would nourish the gods and ensure the continuation of the world for everyone. The victims themselves may have been seen as messengers to the gods, transformed through the act of sacrifice into semi-divine beings. It was the most profound and powerful transaction a human society could make with the cosmos, a terrifying but necessary part of the sacred duty to keep the world turning. The Great Pyramids, gleaming in the sun, were not just monuments of architectural genius. They were also fed by blood, built upon a foundation of sacrifice that, in the minds of their builders, guaranteed the very existence of their universe. After a life lived within the ordered world of Teotihuacan, what happened when that life came to an end? The way a society treats its dead reveals a great deal about its beliefs concerning the soul, the afterlife, and the relationship between the living and the deceased. At Teotihuacan, Death was not seen as a final ending, but as a transition, a journey to another plane of existence. And the dead, particularly one's ancestors, were not gone. They remained a powerful and active presence within the family and the community, a belief system that is reflected in their burial customs. For the vast majority of Teotihuacan's population, the final resting place was right back where life had begun within the apartment compound. The dead were typically buried in simple pits, dug through the plastered floors of the rooms or the open patios. They were usually laid to rest in a flexed or fetal position, perhaps symbolizing a return to the womb of the earth and the hope of rebirth. They were often wrapped in a textile shroud and buried with a few simple grave goods. These were not treasures of gold and jade, but personal and meaningful items for the journey to the afterlife. A woman might be buried with her weaving tools and spindle hools, a craftsman with his obsidian blades, and almost everyone was buried with a few ceramic vessels, likely containing food and water to sustain them on their journey. These humble burials, repeated thousands upon thousands of times beneath the floors of the city, created a unique and powerful relationship between the living and the dead. The ancestors were literally underfoot. Their physical remains were a constant presence in the daily life of the household. As a family gathered around the hearth in the patio, they were also gathering above the graves of their parents, their grandparents, and their great-grandparents. This physical proximity fostered a deep and continuous bond. This practice suggests a powerful form of ancestor worship. The ancestors were not feared ghosts to be avoided. They were revered members of the lineage who had simply passed into another state. They were believed to be able to intercede with the gods on behalf of their living descendants. The small altars found in the patios of the compounds were likely used not just to make offerings to the gods, but also to the ancestors. Families would have fed their ancestors by leaving them offerings of food and drink, and perhaps sought their guidance in times of trouble. The lineage, the connection back through time, was a source of identity, legitimacy, and spiritual power. This focus on the collective lineage rather than the individual may be another reason why we don't see grand, ostentatious burials for single rulers. The continuity of the family or the clan was more important than the glorification of any one person. Of course, not all burials were the same. The social hierarchy we've discussed was reflected in death as it was in life. While most burials were simple, the elite were laid to rest with much richer offerings. Their graves might contain more numerous and finer ceramic vessels, objects made of precious greenstone and jade, and elaborate clothing. Some of the most elaborate non-sacrificial burials were found not in isolated tombs, but still within residential compounds, suggesting that even high-status individuals were seen as part of a larger kin group. The funerary masks, made of polished stone with shell and obsidian inlays, were likely placed over the faces of these deceased elites, transforming them into idealized divine ancestors. However, the most distinct burial practices, as we've seen, belong to the foreign communities. The Zapotec people, in their barrio, maintained their tradition of constructing formal, stone-lined tombs with painted walls, a clear statement of their distinct cultural identity even in death. This tolerance for different funerary customs further highlights the cosmopolitan nature of the city. For the people of Teotihuacan, life was a journey within a sacred, ordered city. Death was simply the next phase of that journey, a passage into the earth from which all life came, and from which the ancestors continued to watch over, guide, and protect the living who walked on the floors above them. For many years, the prevailing image of Teotihuacan was that of a peaceful priestly center, a city whose influence spread primarily through trade and the appeal of its powerful religion. The serene, abstract nature of its art seemed to support this view. But as we've seen from the evidence of the sacrificial warrior burials and the dramatic intervention in the Maya city of Tikal, there was another, much fiercer side to this great metropolis. Teotihuacan was not just a city of pilgrims and merchants. It was the seat of a formidable military power, and its influence was often projected not just through pottery and ideas, but through the sharp, obsidian-tipped points of its spears and darts. The evidence for this military might is woven throughout the city's art and archaeology. The murals, while often depicting priests, are also filled with images of armed figures and powerful predators. We see processions of coyotes, pumas, and eagles dressed in warrior costumes. They wear headdresses, carry rectangular shields decorated with symbols, and brandish atlatls and clubs. These are not simply animals, they are representations of different military orders, elite warrior societies that formed the core of the Teotihuacan army. The jaguar, in particular, was a symbol of military prowess and shamanic power, and warriors who identified with the jaguar were likely among the most feared. Ceramic figurines also depict warriors in full battle gear, giving us a clearer picture of what they looked like. They wore padded cotton armor, which was lightweight and surprisingly effective. They wore helmets, sometimes simple conical caps, and sometimes elaborate constructions carved to look like the heads of predatory animals. Their primary offensive weapon was the atlatl, or spear thrower. This simple device, essentially a stick with a hook at one end, acted as an extension of the throwing arm, allowing a warrior to hurl a short, obsidian-tipped dart with incredible force and accuracy, far exceeding the range and power of a simple hand-thrown spear. This technology gave the Teotihuacan army a significant advantage in long-range combat. For close-quarters fighting, they used short swords or clubs edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades. The state's control over the obsidian industry was the foundation of its military power. The ability to mass-produce hundreds of thousands of uniform projectile points meant that Teotihuacan could field and supply large, well-equipped armies. The military was not a haphazard militia. It was a professional, institutionalized part of the state. Its purpose was multifold. It was used to defend the city and its surrounding territory. It was used to protect the long-distance trade caravans that were the lifeblood of the city's economy. And as the events at Tikal show, it was used aggressively to project power, to conquer other polities, and to install rulers who would serve Teotihuacan's interests. This form of indirect rule, controlling foreign cities through puppet kings, was a savvy and efficient way to build an empire without the need to permanently occupy vast territories. The primary goal of this expansion was likely economic. The army was used to secure access to critical resources that were not available in the highlands of central Mexico, the cacao, cotton, and rubber of the tropical lowlands, the jade of the Motagua Valley, and the brilliant quetzal feathers of the cloud forests. Warfare itself also had a deep ritual and religious dimension. The ultimate goal of a battle was not necessarily to kill the enemy on the battlefield, but to take them captive. These captives, as we saw in the sacrificial burials, were the most precious offerings that could be made to the gods. The act of capturing an enemy warrior was one of the highest honors a Teotihuacan soldier could achieve, and it was likely a key path to social advancement within the military orders. The warriors who marched out from the great city did so not just for conquest and tribute, but for a sacred purpose. They were the providers of the precious water that the gods demanded. This intertwining of military, economic, and religious motives created a powerful and self-reinforcing system. Military conquest secured trade routes and tribute, which made the city wealthy. It also provided captives for sacrifice, which was believed to keep the gods happy and the cosmos in balance. The fierce, disciplined armies of Teotihuacan were the engine of this empire, the force that allowed a single city to dominate the political and economic landscape of Mesoamerica for centuries. And so we come to the final quiet mystery. After more than 5 centuries as the dominant political, economic, and religious power in Mesoamerica, the great city of Teotihuacan fell, but its end was not like that of many other ancient empires, a story of conquest by a rival power. There is no evidence that the city was overthrown by foreign invaders. Instead, sometime around the year 550 AD, the city seems to have collapsed from within. The end was violent and sudden. Archaeological evidence shows that the great temples and palaces along the Avenue of the Dead, the very heart of the state's power, were systematically burned and destroyed. But this was not random destruction. The apartment compounds where the common people lived were largely untouched. This suggests not a foreign invasion, but a targeted internal uprising, an act of desecration by the city's own people, or a faction within it, aimed squarely at the ruling elite and the state religion they represented. What could have caused such a catastrophic collapse? There is no single answer, and scholars believe it was likely a combination of several interlocking factors, a perfect storm of pressures that finally broke the foundations of this once unshakable society. One major factor may have been environmental. The city and its large population placed an immense strain on the surrounding landscape. The constant demand for wood to burn for cooking, heating, and most importantly, for firing the vast quantities of lime plaster needed to cover the city's buildings, led to widespread deforestation. This deforestation would have caused massive soil erosion, reducing the productivity of the agricultural land that the city depended on. A period of prolonged drought, which paleoclimatic evidence suggests may have occurred around this time, would have been devastating to a society already on the brink of an ecological crisis. Famine and malnutrition may have become widespread, weakening the population and eroding their faith in the rulers and priests, whose primary duty was to ensure the benevolence of the gods and the fertility of the land. This environmental stress was likely compounded by social and political problems. The rigid hierarchical structure of the city, which had been a source of strength for centuries, may have become a source of weakness. The ruling elite may have become increasingly demanding in their requirements for tribute and labor, even as the resources to support them were dwindling. The complex system of craft specialization and long-distance trade was fragile. If the trade routes were disrupted, perhaps by the rise of rival powers in other regions, the flow of essential goods and the wealth they generated would have dried up, causing economic instability. The common people, facing hardship and starvation, may have finally lost faith in a ruling class that seemed unable to solve the crisis and that continued to live in luxury. The final burning of the temples may have been an act of profound disillusionment, a violent rejection of the gods and the leaders who had failed them. After this violent event, the city was not completely abandoned, but it entered a period of rapid decline. The population shrank dramatically. People continued to live on in some of the apartment compounds for a time, but the central authority was gone. The great city, the center of the world, began to crumble. Its grand buildings were looted, and it slowly began to be reclaimed by nature. By the time the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico some 700 years later, Teotihuacan was a city of silent, earth-covered hills. They were so awed by its scale that they believed it could not have been built by mortals, but must have been the work of giants, the very place where the current world was created. And so they gave it the name we use today, Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the gods. And perhaps they were right. It was a place where a new kind of world was created. A world of cities, of states, of empires. Though its people are gone, and its original name is lost to the wind, the silent monumental city they left behind continues to whisper its story, a timeless and poignant reminder of the incredible rise and the mysterious, quiet fall of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known.